It's showtime. We are live. We made it. Mark's a deathly silence. But, hey,
hello, great to be here.
We are live now. So I just thought before we get started. Pardon, what's that?
Technology, isn't it brilliant when it works?
Yeah, which isn't it when it works? Yeah. I just thought before we started, I would just share the backstory to how this even came into being. Because for those who don't know, Mark wrote a post which, in short, said, "You're dead to me," and this provoked a very deep and lively discussion on whether we're actually truly living or not. And it felt such a shame to leave it as just words on a page. So we decided to bring it to life. So here is us bringing those amazing words to life and asking people as to whether they are truly living or not. So here we are, and welcome, guys. We already have quite a few people sitting here waiting with bated breath. How are you guys?
Really well, thanks, Laura. Yeah, great.
Excellent, Laura. Alive and well.
Excellent. So are we truly living? The big question.
And a great starting point, right? And I was asking this question earlier on today of someone, and it came to the point of, how do we know if we're truly living or not? How do we know that we are the person in charge of our own life? How do we know that this is the life that we want to live? How do we know that what we do is what's good for us or what's not good for us? And I think we know. I think as much as we will deny it, as much as we will pretend things are fine, and Dan, I know we had some speaking a bit about burnout this week, and I think for a lot of people, what will happen into our lives is we'll be focused on something. We'll be focused on, the job is the important thing, the career is the important thing. This is what I have to get. This shiny baubles, whatever they are, and we'll ignore all these signals. We'll ignore the body telling us things aren't right. We'll ignore the messages, because especially now, Laura, to be a bit sexist here, as a man, I don't feel anything, so don't need any of that, you know. And we'll keep ignoring these things until our body tells us, this is not alive. This is not our life. This is not the right way. Yeah. So I think we know if we're alive or not.
I'm with you, and I don't necessarily think it's a male only thing. I think the body does, as the book goes, the body does keep the score, and the body definitely does. But we're so busy a lot of the time that we don't notice these signals that our body is sending us, or we just recognize it. And I know, Dan, you talk about this a lot. We just notice that we're shouting at the kids more, or we're getting more stressed. It's all of those symptoms that tells us that there's a disconnect. What do you think, Dan?
Yeah, absolutely. And the disconnect comes when we're busy doing instead of being. And I know we've had this conversation many a time, Laura, that we're human beings, but yet our culture teaches us from a very early age to focus on doing and having. And the disconnect starts there. And what happens is we lose touch with our innate intelligence. And, you know, you're talking about the body there, and there's so much intelligence in the body, like millions of years of evolution, rather than the few years we've been around as ourselves. Yeah. And we're taught from an early age to ignore it, to override it, to use our rationality, which is a wonderful tool for creating things, to create this image of ourselves and then live from there. So we create this shell, this mask, this persona, and lots of them sometimes, and we don't live from the core of our being. And those personas are all about doing and having. And actually, all the doing and having, if we're truly living, comes from being.
That is so, it's so true. Like, you know, that concept of the human doing and the human being. And Laura, you know, what kind of started our conversation was when you brought your true story to my post and spoke about
Yeah,
what you had gone through. And I think would be remiss of me not to share something similar, that I was working in the corporate world and I have a 20-year career behind me. And I was sitting there one night, it was 11 p.m. at night, working away again, and it just stopped. I just thought to myself, what am I doing? If I don't, and like, I knew I didn't enjoy it, right? I enjoyed aspects of it, but it was consistent, constant. It was 11 o'clock every night. I'd be working, finish, go to bed, get up early in the morning, start working again. I asked myself, what the hell am I doing? Because I know this is killing me. This is not right for me. And I actually just had this epiphany. I just thought to myself, if I don't change my life, is this my life until I retire?
yeah,
And then it dawned on me, my father is a kind of a role model for me in terms of his attitude and his way of living, or way of looking at life. But he passed away at 57 years old. And I was thinking, so wait a second, do I even get to retire? So is this it? Is this all that's left for me? Like, and that actually scared me more than the idea of change. Because I think so many of us, we want something different, but we're so scared of what that change would be because it's outside our comfort zone. But I knew if I didn't do something different, then the road I was going down was not a road I wanted to be on. And if the road we're on is not a road we want to be on, we got to turn.
yeah. I totally agree with you, Margaret. It's that, you know, and I think, and as somebody who body definitely knew the score because it basically shut down because I went into burnout. For those who don't know my story, went through successive losses of my husband, health and career within a space of about 6 to 8 weeks. So I went from having this amazing corporate career to having nothing. I went from hero to zero, and I had to have the pieces. So where you describe pushing beyond the comfort zone, I actually didn't have a comfort zone anymore. I just had pieces of a life. And trust me, as somebody who's had to pick up those pieces and rebuild it, that is a heck of a lot harder to rebuilding and re-navigating something from a more solid base. I have done both. No, not wanting that as a badge of honor, but I am just, you know, I do occasionally flippantly say, you know, I am the queen of chaos.
Sounds like a superhero.
I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but you know, but you're right though, Mark, and Dan, I know we have talked loads about this, is, you know, but we kid ourselves about we're enjoying ourselves. You know, we kind of look to, and I certainly would have done back in what I call life mark 1, where we tell ourselves that we're loving what we're doing. You know, we're deceiving.
We build stories, don't we? Yeah, and we become incredibly good at lying to ourselves and ignoring the fact that we're not living life from the core of our being. To give those who don't know me a little bit of my story, so I spent 20 years working in broadcasting as a TV and digital video producer and director, and the last 10 years of that I'd spent broadcasting sport. And as somebody who's very passionate about sport and all kinds of sport, that was just an absolute dream for me to do that job. It was amazing. I got to work at, you know, Olympic Games, World Cups, Commonwealth Games, you name it. I've been there and I've worked with some of the most talented people in the world and amazing, tremendous, wonderful things I got to do. So, of course, all the messages that were telling me I was on the wrong path, as Mark was saying earlier on, you know, I was sacrificing everything for that career, everything, including myself and my well-being. I prioritized it over everything. And eventually, when I kept ignoring the messages, life hit me in the face with a brick, and I burnt out too. I'm fairly stoic and fairly resilient, so I still did have a solid platform, as Laura was saying, to come from. But yeah, I lied to myself for years, and I also followed the path set out for me by my culture. You know, get educated, work hard, get the good career, get the car, get the house, get the marriage, get the luxury holidays, the nice watches, the designer clothes, all that stuff. And you know, I looked at myself and thought, well, I'm successful, right? Look what I'm doing. Look what I do for a living. Look how I'm living. This is success. But inside me was just empty. And as Mark alluded to earlier on, as a man, I learned how to ignore my feelings and push away at things I didn't like, and tell myself I was enjoying myself, because having lots of fun all the time and short-term pleasure and indulging in all that stuff to nourishing my soul, I was telling myself, but what I was doing was ruining my body and mind at the same time, and all just so I could not look where I feared to tread, which was to just be me. And I built this whole persona, this TV producer, director guy, who worked 60-hour weeks and never switched off and was always contactable, who was really good at what he did. And as Mark said, one day, you know, I had a massive panic attack. I think that happened to me, and I suddenly looked at my future after I recovered from that and went, oh my God, is this it? Is this what I've got to do? I've got to drive myself into the floor to try and make TV for people. I was like, no way, this can't be it. This can't be it. And yeah, and I kind of rebuilt from there, and started with a blank sheet of paper. And then the best thing I ever did, well, is the BBC that did it for me. I took voluntary redundancy. They gave me a coach. And it was the first time in my life that someone pointed me in the direction of focusing who I was being, who taught me that life works, or you get real, true, lasting, fulfilling success by living be, do, have, and not have, do, be, or do, have, be, which is the way we've been taught to do it. And it's about stripping away everything and getting real clarity on who you are, and that is what your core values are, and then what you're passionate about, the things that light you up. You know, life pulls you if you can block out the noise and you let it. You know, doors open for you. We're taught we've got to smash doors down and climb over walls, and you know, to be successful. And I've done plenty of that in my time. But actually, now I focus on being. Life happens for me. You know, things like us three being here tonight is because the three of us understand. A door opens, you go through it, and that's what life's like. And it flows, and you realise life is happening for you and not to you. So for most of my life, I've just been a victim of circumstance, bashing from one event to the next, bringing the past to bear, thinking I know what's going on, because I'm smart and I'm clever and I'm experienced, and totally losing sight of that. You know, my core values. What are my principles? What are my priorities? What, you know, how do I want to live every day? What are my habits and routines? What's the end game? What am I aiming to do with all that stuff? And making conscious decisions instead of reacting on autopilot all the time, and constantly bringing the past to bear on the future. And slightly, you know, like you always talk about, Laura, those times where we just pause and we say, you know, what's going on here? What are we doing? Do I just need 5 minutes to work out who I'm being in this moment?
I think you raised a really good point, though, Dan. It's like, and I don't know, I'm curious to know what both of you think, but it really just struck me in what you're saying is that, do you think people know how, you said, but how do I be me? Do you think people know how to be themselves?
Wow. How long have we got, Laura? I think,
sit back and
like, I had the pleasure of doing a TED Talk on my philosophy on coaching is coming home to yourself. That's my philosophy on coaching. That's what I describe it as. That's what you're trying to do. You're trying to come home to yourself. And I got the opportunity to do a TED Talk, and I thought coming home to yourself is a little bit too vague. That's a coaching term. So I titled it The Magic of Being Yourself. And I spent a long time. I had this hour-long talk that I wrote for the TED Talk and spoke to the TED event organizer. I said, you do know it's supposed to be like 12 to 15 minutes. But okay, right. So I started condensing the thing then, right? And so it made me really examine what all this was and what all this was doing. And like, do we know who we really are? Deep down, we absolutely do. 100% we do. There are times in our life where we are shining, where stuff happens, stuff comes across us, and we're like, oh, that I love that, whatever that is. But it doesn't fit with the model we're playing, it doesn't fit with the role we're playing, it doesn't fit with, maybe it's the masculine world that we're in, whatever part of the world that we're in, it doesn't fit. And therefore we dismiss it. But it's always there. It's like when I shifted out of the corporate world and I shifted into the world of coaching and speaking, I remember at the very beginning, I was talking to people about doing it, and they were like, that's perfect for you. I was like, Jesus, really? Can I do this? And I realized, you know what, this is what I do. I've been coaching people for 20 years in my job as managing people. I'd always been doing it. And it's always the thing that lit me up, would light me up when I'd speak to one of the staff members and they'd be struggling with something, and I'd help them out and I'd find them a way through it. And suddenly I would leave feeling, this is great. I'm doing something worthwhile. I'm doing something of value. So it's there. And there's pieces all through our life that we've touched on that we know is who we really are. And if we're willing to allow ourselves to stop playing these roles and to allow ourselves to come back home, it's there for us.
I totally agree with you, Mark. I mean, for those who follow me, they know I talk about brand me. And brand me is, who am I? What matters most to me? And the most important one, and I was talking with a client earlier about, what is it that you want to feel? That one word. So I know I want to feel alive. And when I feel alive, these things happen for me. And, you know, for me, it's to have a window into another's world, you know, to be curious, to learn, to grow. That is what makes me feel alive. Hence why we're having this conversation here today. But I think it's, you know, there's another dimension for me why being ourselves is so important now more than ever before, and especially as somebody who's gone through a fair few transitions, usually thrown into them as opposed to out of necessary choice. But you know, we'll park that for now. But is the difference between that, and then I've been having this big dilemma with people, because people say to me, oh, you're really resilient. For me, there's a difference between resilience and inner strength that comes from knowing oneself. And when you know oneself, your brand me, or coming home to yourself as you describe it, Mark, it's like the roots of the tree. And so, you know, the roots are under the ground, it's holding you strong. You know, the tree could get cut right back, but it will still grow. Resilience for me is the bit that's above the ground. That is the bit that will bounce back, that will, you know, reflourish. All of those things will happen. But when you really know yourself, who you are, your values, as Dan says, and, you know, I call it belonging in our own skin rather than the mask, the facade, and all the rest of it. We are so much stronger in ourselves, and actually the world around us can do whatever the world wants to do, because actually the roots of our tree, i.e. ourselves, is so much stronger. Just a thought.
And yeah, you're absolutely right, Laura. It's like, and that's the thing that we've got to tune into, isn't it? And like Mark said, it's feeling that's going to take us there, and it's that whole self. You know, there's so many parts of us. You know, different aspects of us, and you know, we're made up of mind, body, soul, and we often get focused on one over the other. So it's, you know, sometimes we're good at looking after our body and focusing on our body, but we neglect our mind, or the other way around, or we don't do things that nourish our soul. And there's one way to know what's for you, and that's how you feel. And that sounds really simple and easy, but when you layer years upon years of social conditioning and forming views, opinions, and beliefs based on what happens to you and what you're told and what you hear, that complicates everything. So, you know, it sounds really simple to just, oh, well, follow your passions, follow your heart. But if you're so used to employing your rational mind, if that's what you identify as who you are, or your egoic mind, or your personality, and like Mark says, everything that doesn't fit that doesn't come in. You know, there's only so much a conscious mind can do. So you really got to strip all that stuff away, all that stuff that isn't really you. You know, I always talk a lot about living by somebody else's rules, and a surefire way to know if if you're living by somebody else's rules, if your actions, if the things you're doing in order to achieve results in your life are coming from thinking you should have to do something, that you must do something, that you ought to do something, or you have to, because who says, right? Who says? And then if you hear yourself saying that, chase it back. Where does that come from? Because all views, opinions, and beliefs are thoughts about something that's happened to you, thoughts about circumstance and an event that you've never questioned. And that we form all this stuff in our early years where we have no life experience. So therefore we take it from authority, we take it from school, upbringing, people we admire, authority figures. And if we never question it, if we never turn our awareness on that, that drives our emotions and our feelings, and therefore our thoughts, and therefore our actions. And we get frustrated by our results because then they're not coming from the core of our being. They're coming from this creation, this belief system. And it's something we all need to be really aware of. And we all need to create it as consciously as we can.
Yeah, that's great analogies there, guys. Like, very visual. I love them. The word that always crops up in all of this for me is that word choice. And whether we are like, if life is happening to us, then we're not choosing what we're doing in life. We're not choosing how we live. And you mentioned beliefs there, right? And we think we're choosing based on beliefs, but we're not choosing at all. We've created these beliefs for safety, for whatever it is. But a belief, like, I love the idea, the fact that the word lie is in the middle of the word belief. It's sitting right there, because that's what a belief is. It's never, ever true. No matter what the belief is, it's still something that has been created to try and make us feel a certain way, but it's not the truth. And when we begin to choose what we want to do in every situation, then we are no longer reacting to what's going on. We're responding to the world around us. And it's hard. It is a hard thing to do, to respond and to choose and to make the hard choice, to choose the thing that's right for us, as opposed to the popular thing or the thing that's easy, which is what we tend to choose all the time, the easy thing. But when we learn to, then everything changes. And that very first point, the very start of it all, is choosing to live as we need to be and choosing to make that first change.
I think because that's where my brain was going, Mark, was, if people are just going, right now, I don't feel like I'm truly living based on what I've heard thus far. What's that first point? I mean, where do people start?
Oh, okay. So
I know it's a big question.
And that's the thing, right? So where do we start, right? We start by, Dan has rightly mentioned that feel, right? So the emotional response, the body is like the brain will tell stories, and I could talk about stories for hours here, because we're storytelling machines. We live by story. We come from oral cultures that built stories in order to teach us about the world. That's what we do. So we like stories. So we create the stories for ourselves. The brain will do it. The heart can deceive us a little bit because it has its own intentions, but the body will not lie. It doesn't know how to lie. It cannot lie. So the starting point is to listen to how we feel, to actually listen to how we feel, observe it, right? Well, I don't feel right in this world. So if I don't feel right, what is the reason I don't feel right? What's the reason I'm feeling wrong? Is it what I'm doing? Is it how I'm living? Is it where I'm living? Is it environmental? Is it is it the house that I'm living in? Is it the people that I'm in? Is it the relationship that I'm in? What are all these things? And sometimes it can be every single one of them. And if it is, well, then maybe we need to look a little bit closer in the mirror than at the external piece. But that's our starting point. And then we have to ask ourselves, like, what is the thing that's most frustrating? You use the word, Dan, frustration there, like the frustrations are building up. What are the shoulds? What are these things that are most on my mind all the time? What am I like going, oh, I should change that, I should do that? What's the one that's there all the time? When you wake in the morning, it's there, the thing you think about. There's where we start. Right? What's that thing? How can I do something different in that space? Because just to begin to change that and not think about it any longer, take the bloody action to do something about it. That action can be something you can do yourself. It can be maybe you talk to somebody for the first time about it. Maybe you hire someone to help you with it. Whatever that action is for you to take. But it's about the action to take to move you forward.
Action is important, because I think one of the things I know I've certainly talked about, I have mixed views around journaling, shall we say, because we can write till the cows come home, but journaling per se doesn't actually get you any place sometimes, because it requires action to happen. And I think we hit upon that point just there. Dan, what else would you add to that? I mean, Mark's,
Yeah, well, when action always comes into the discussion, for me, the word that comes up is intention, because I think intention is where the real power is, and it's the intention behind your action that's going to that will drive the results. So I think, what Mark's saying there about the feeling, if something's waking you up at night, that's a really good place to start. That's something to look at. And what you're looking to get is clarity. And that's the first step towards getting clarity, is that I'm feeling bad, something's keeping me up at night, and know something's going on here. And the best thing to do is get help, is to turn to experts, is to read books, listen to podcasts, follow the people on social media that are leading the way on this stuff, and work out how you can get to the core of your being, how you can strip away all the stuff that Mark's talking about, the stories we create for ourselves, because those stories are how we pass down knowledge from generation to generation. They have served us incredibly well, particularly before the digital age. This is how we passed on knowledge. And, we have stories that we create for ourselves, and that keep us safe and get us places and get results for us. So, we're not throwing out the stories. The stories are how we live. But what we're all searching for really is truth, is some sort of truth about what's going on, and that is driven by how you feel. So what you need clarity to understand exactly who you are and what you care about, and really important is to understand why you care about it. What is the ultimate aim? What are you really living for? What's your real intention to create in the world? Because I believe that's what we're here to do, is to kind of create and grow and evolve as beings, having an experience. And Mark touched on something there that I think is really key, and it's responding instead of reacting. That's the word responsibility for me is about your ability to respond. And I think it was Viktor Frankl in his book Man's Search for Meaning, who talked about our power to create our existence lay in that gap between event and stimulus and response. And we live such busy information filled, doing filled lives that it's efficient for our minds to just respond for us. Is to go, we've seen this before, something's happened to us in the past, I know what this is. Assumption, reaction, autopilot. And we all live so much of our lives on that, unless we take a pause and we stop and we get a bit of clarity and we ask ourselves in that moment, who are we being right now? And you remember what those core values are. And then you respond from a calm and measured place, even when life is going batshit, because it does. Let's face it, life is not a nice, even, if you've got really good self-awareness and you're a really quite evolved human being, life is nuts. It's not fair. It deliberately throws lots of crap at you all at one go for you to work out who you are in relation to it.
Yeah.
And if we're busy reacting, we're stuck in the past.
Danny, I so agree with you, and I think one of the things that was going through my head, in part in response to Mark Simmons' comment as well, about having to feel what feels right.
Yeah, I love that, experimenting. Because if you don't push the envelope and test yourself out and see what you're capable of, how will you ever know?
And I absolutely agree. And I think some of the challenges, and look, we're all learning. I mean, I think this is one thing I'm going to just caveat. Just because we have these perspectives, we're still learning as well. Well, I certainly am.
Yeah, absolutely.
I've the art by now, but I'm still learning. But it's one of the things that I find really interesting is the number of times when I'm trying to feel the right, is this right for me? Is it aligned? Because I'm kind of know myself, and I'm looking out there at things, and I'm kind of trying to see, does this resonate? Is this right for me? Is this aligned with where I want to go? I call it a direction of travel. And a number of times people say to me, oh, stop procrastinating. And I'm just kind of going, actually, no, I am not procrastinating. Do you know how much my brain is kind of assessing what I'm doing? You might not see me doing anything, but I am actually aligning myself to what feels right. I'm trying little things. I'm not going to exert lots of energy on a project that, you know, frankly, doesn't 100% feel right, but I will certainly take steps to assess whether it feels right or not, and then do a course redirect if necessary. But I think that's part of the challenge, is because, you know, much as we've discussed earlier on, is that the world sees efficiency, productivity, etc., as doing as opposed to being. They can't accept, and I think there's definitely something, people don't like silence either. So therefore, if you're not doing something, there is something perhaps wrong. And so people then have to fill that space as well, which I always find very interesting. You know, it's just how it is. But I think that is, you know, is one of the things that's been kind of going through my head as we've been talking is, you know, if there are so many great things about really knowing yourself and being really grounded in yourself, and that's what truly living is, because that's, you know, going to be your mark on the world, what stops people from making that shift? And, you know, part of it is the societal part of it is, you know, what we're brought up to believe, part of it is fear, part of it is, you know, it's some of it's the beliefs as well, but it's also what, you know, a lot of society is so quick to jump in and say you're doing something wrong, this is the right way. And the reality is, you know, the only right way is the way that you're going to do it, because only you will ever know exactly the experiences you've had, exactly the capability. I mean, I give you the example when I went and climbed Snowdon back up in September. I wasn't the fastest, shall we say. Everyone kept saying to me, can't get faster, come on. Or where's Laura? Now, look, bearing in mind, I have had bilateral hip and back surgery, so I think I was doing quite well anyway. We were going on a little walk. Well, it was more like a climb. But we got 2/3 of the way up there, and some of those who've been really pushing hard just bailed out and never made it to the top. I made it to the summit because actually I knew myself really well. I knew that I needed to maintain a steady pace all the way, because I knew what I was capable of, and I stuck to that despite what everybody else was telling me to do, that I needed to go faster. It was really, really hard, and I kind of see that as a metaphor for what it's like when we're trying to make changes that are out of the norm. But then, you know, success was mine because I actually made it to the top. Almost got blown off as well because it was very, very windy, and I didn't see very much at the top because it was very foggy. You know, I could just about see my hand. But, you know, the point still stands, is that I had, right at the start of that journey, defined my success was that I wanted to get to the top. That was, you know, for me, that was going to be a real accomplishment, a real version of success, because I've never done anything like that. Most people, who know me, would, you know that I tend to wear a pair of heeled boots rather than flat boots. I mean, it doesn't help that I'm not very tall, but so, you know, the thought of actually, I mean, I did have to borrow the wet weather gear from my nieces who play hockey in the rain, because I don't have that kind of stuff, but I still made it to the top. So I guess that, you know, I say that story really as kind of a sort of snapshot of that is really what, you know, life is. And we will get knocked off course, but because I was grounded knowing in myself what I was capable of, despite what the world is telling me, i.e. the people on there, I still made it to the top. But I don't know. I guess it's a really interesting one. I'm very conscious that there's lots and lots and lots of people listening in here, which I've read some of the comments, but I just wondered whether anybody had any specific questions thus far. We haven't really paused.
Yeah. Well, just to wait for some questions to come through, Laura. Just you said something wonderful there about you're still growing, and I think we're all still growing. And a beautiful line I read in the book 25 years ago that I've never forgotten, and it was a conversation between two people. One was a spiritual teacher, and the other person, was just a learner like we all are, and said to him, the learner asked the teacher, am I finished learning? And the teacher said, are you still alive? And he goes, well, yeah. And he goes, well, then you're not finished learning. And there's another guy, John Moriarty, a wonderful Irish philosopher, that passed away about 12 years ago, like probably the most erudite man ever in Ireland. His books are worse than Ulysses in terms of the challenge and difficulty of them. But he spoke about, he's impenetrable, to be honest with you, but he's wonderful to listen to. And he spoke about, is life, am I still growing? And he said, maybe am I still growing is not really the question. Is life still an adventure? Is the question, and I think that's a beautiful way to look at it. Is life still an adventure? And if we don't feel like our life is an adventure, and through the turbulence, Dan, that you talk about, and Laura, like life throws all sorts of crap at you. We can all list the challenges and the problems we have between our family and ourselves and our health and all the other stuff that's going on in our life. We can list these things, but that doesn't mean we can't grow through them and grow past them. And I think that's our challenge, because once we become rigid in our thinking, rigid in our way of being, then we begin to have an awful lot of problems. As long as we were able to move and keep flowing and keep responding, then we can be free to keep being.
And I absolutely agree. But I heard an analogy the other day, and I think this perfectly describes what you're describing just there. Do you want to be sitting as the train driver on a set of tracks that keeps you there stuck on that way, or do you want to be the sailor on a sailboat and being able to adapt the sails and whatever else? And I think that's the difference to which you're describing. Do you want to stay stuck, or do you want that fluidity, the adaptability that comes when you're in a sailboat? I'm sure there's proper terminology, but I'm not a sailor, in case you haven't noticed. I'm life, but not necessarily of a real boat. There isn't much water near Tunbridge Wells. Lots of rain, but not much water otherwise. What about you, Dan?
Yeah, so I love what Mark said there about the adventure, because that's what life should be, right? Life should be an adventure. Well, there I go using should, but life is an adventure, right? And those challenges, the shit that life throws us, that is the adventure. That's the adventure. Now we can either be victims of it and woe is me, and and don't get me wrong, I am not denigrating some of the lives people live. I'm a listening volunteer for the Samaritans, so I get to hear some horrendous tales about how people are living. But you can choose your point of view. Mark talked about it earlier, choice. When you strip everything away, we are basically just aware beings with choice. That's the game, right? But we've got to slow down, Laura, haven't we? In order to make conscious choices, in order to give that space between stimulus and response, between event and what happens, and not be victims of circumstance, to flow with life. And yeah, it does kick the crap out of you sometimes, but we need that. That's, change is the only thing we can guarantee in life. And sometimes change is painful, but you can be less painful, Laura, as you pointed out earlier on, if you're grounded, if you understand your unique gifts and talents, what you bring to the table, what you're capable of. And what I love about your story most, Laura, that you shared earlier on, is that you defined what success meant. You didn't take any outside cues of what success was. You said, this for me is success. That is one of the absolute keys for authentic living and for really living and being yourself, is defining your own success and measuring it in your own way.
Yeah, beautiful. Guys, there's a question there from Mark Simmons I think we should answer. I'll read it out, guys, and I'll let yourselves. I have an opinion on it too. Mark did ask, and it's a great question. Would you recommend getting feedback from a close friend or family member to help you find out whether you are truly living?
Can I answer? Because I've got a thought straight away. I would say it depends on the close friend or family member, but when you're asking somebody who's that close and involved in your life, they are when you ask them that, their immediate response is probably going to be to project all their shit onto you, because that's what we do with the people close to us and our loved ones. Now, what you can do if you've got a partner in your life or somebody you're really close to is go on the adventure together and discover together, are we truly living? Let's strip back. Let's find out the core of our being. Let's work out ways that our feelings can show us how we can slow down, how we can pause, how we can decide what we really care about and prioritize together. You can go on that journey, but as the three of us sat here as coaches, we're all going to say, get yourself expert help, somebody who can hold the mirror up. Now, it depends where you are in your journey, what that help would look like, whether that's counseling, whether that's therapy, whether that's joining a group where you're amongst people in the same situation and like minds. But I would just be really aware, Mark, of that people are going to put their own perspective on what they feed back to you, and you're going to be getting their point of view and not necessarily the mirror you need to show you whether you're at the core of your being. But if you've got that close relationship with someone, absolutely use that. Absolutely do.
No, I'm with you, Dan. I think they will see it through their lens of the world based on their experiences. So to give Mark some context, I have a sister who's got 4 kids and a job in London. Husband works in London as well. Now, if she gives me a perspective and her thoughts on my life as a widowed single woman who did have a corporate career for 25 years until the world imploded, she's looking at it through that. So her advice is, and the classic as well, when so often you have come through a really challenging time, those who are closest to you want to keep you safe. And their suggestions aren't always practical. There's a slight level of sarcasm coming in my voice, because my mother's suggestion when my world had imploded was, perhaps I would like to go back to ballet. Needless to say, at 41, going back to ballet was not exactly going to save my life. So I'm being somewhat flippant about it, but I guess in her trying to, and yeah, she was right. And ironically, actually, I have gone back to dance now at 51, and not ballet, needless to say. And I do love that. But she was trying to keep me really safe because she had seen how much pain I'd gone through. But that then didn't allow me to make, you talk about the mirror being shown back at you, but it didn't allow me to really try and change some of the patterns I know I needed to change to have something different. Because I definitely, the one thing I did want was something different from life Mark 1, because I followed the rules in Mark 1 on where did that get me to. Still, I got me to 0. And so I had to rebuild. So I'm going to, that's kind of where I would go to in my thoughts. So I don't know, I'm very conscious that between the three of us, we could talk for a very long time, but I think we might be doing this again. What do you reckon?
Oh yeah, I think it's a great idea.
So if there was Dan's there, okay. So if there's one, oh my God, that's very fancy, Dan. I can't do that. I'm not about to do a pirouette or anything for anybody else's benefit, because that would be horrendously bad. So I'm going to just throw it there. What one thing you're going to leave everybody with?
Oh, it's going to Dan go first. Dan, the fireworks.
But I'm going to be even more polite. I'm going to trump your politeness and let you go, Mark.
Okay, great. Well, I thought the fireworks was what you were leaving us with there, Dan. But okay. Okay, very simply. So there's look, there's a multitude of things we could do, and multitudes of ways we can go, and perspective and all this. But it's very challenging if we're in a situation where we don't know. Oh, sorry, it's my. I don't know if that came through. That probably dialing someone was ringing me there, right? There's a multitude of things we can do, but sometimes, and we know this as coaches, the power of a really good question that can just open us up and stop us in our tracks. And so it's hard to ask ourselves a question, okay? Because, how do you challenge yourself? Do you stand one side of the table and move to the other side of the table? But what I love is, how does this serve me? It's very simple. But we ask ourselves when we're doing something, how does this serve me? Is this moving me forward? Is this moving me towards where I want to be? Is this putting me under more pressure? Is this stress? And that, how does it serve me, can be the task that you're doing, can be the work that you're doing, can be, very importantly, the thought that you're thinking. What you're thinking, what's going through your head, how does it serve me to think these thoughts right now? Because that can be just a way to stop and do that pause we were speaking about, and then move into a different direction.
Yeah, and I would absolutely follow the same thing. The key to living a successful and relatively pain-free life is awareness, is self-awareness. Whatever you can do, whatever tool works for you, in order that you can slow down and become aware of yourself, what you're doing. Like Mark said, ask yourself those powerful questions that really make you stop and think. Ask yourself, for what purpose? Before you, like Laura says, take that pause. You're not procrastinating. Just ask yourself, this action, this thing I'm about to say, this decision I'm about to make, this choice I'm about to make, for what purpose?
No, I agree. I think, ultimately what we're saying here is like the self-awareness and, what is really going on, what's really going on for me. And, the bottom line is that, I forget who said it, but life is an adventure, otherwise it is nothing at all. So on that note, if no one has any more questions, I thought we would leave our wonderful, amazing audience for the evening, and hope they have a wonderful evening or afternoon, depending where they are in the world.
Thank you so much for people coming along and all your comments and everything. That's really great, because I did wonder if it just be the three of us rabbiting at each other. But yeah, thank you.
I agree. There's been lots and lots of people watching, so we've clearly had something to say for 40 odd minutes.
Thanks all.